Hello, and welcome to another podcast. And just looking at my schedule, this will be the last one for 2025. So this will be between Christmas, if you celebrate such things, and New Year. So I hope you had a good holiday, whether you celebrate anything or not. And hope you have a great year in 2026. And also hope that you've made progress this year. Sometimes at the end of the year, it's quite nice to look back and see perhaps where we were a year ago with regard to photography, wildlife, whatever it might be for you. And hopefully you've made progress and you are feeling more satisfied maybe with the results you're getting. And I hope that the podcast has been a part of that. I hope you found these podcasts useful. If you have, please remember to like and subscribe. And also, you're very welcome to just drop me a line, an email with any topics you'd like me to cover. And I really appreciate it when people do that. So what I'm going to talk about in this final podcast is 7 wildlife photography mistakes that photographers make. And these definitely happen with people who are new to wildlife photography or new to photography, but they can also crop up again, or at least some of them, because after a while, it's like familiarity breeds contempt, and sometimes we forget some of the basic things that make the difference between a very ordinary photograph and something that you're really proud of. So part of this is to act as a reminder to just go back to the basics from time to time and remind yourself how to do certain things, because it's very easy to get into the habit of using only certain functions on the camera, and then we forget what the other ones do. So that is the purpose of this. And in terms of my photography, if you're not familiar with me, I would really just say the cake is in the eating, or I can't remember what the phrase is now, but go have a look at the website. You'll see my work, and if you like it, then I'm always happy to share what I know about photography, whether it's through things like these podcasts, through mini workshops, which we'll be running in the new year, and also my online course. So you can jump on to the online courses, and they're designed to take you from basics, assuming no knowledge at all, and giving you all the fundamentals of photography so that you can specialize, but from a position of knowing what you're doing with no gaps in your knowledge. And I think that's the most important reason for doing a paid course. Okay, so let's dive into it. The very first thing I'm going to look at is getting focused on the camera gear rather than the techniques themselves. So one of the things that I come across a lot, and I've certainly been guilty of this in the past myself, a long time ago now, but just thinking that it's about the gear, so new gear will solve a problem. No, it might, depending on what the problem is. But basically, good camera equipment will not compensate for someone who doesn't understand basic photography techniques. So if you don't understand the exposure triangle, or you don't understand how to achieve certain results, having good camera gear is not the thing that will make the difference. You might get lucky, you might get a result that you like every now and again, but if you don't know how you got there, you're not consistent, then you don't know what you're doing, basically. So the key is to be consistent. And in fact, somebody who gave me video testimonial on my DSLR and mirrorless course actually made that point, that he was getting into photography, keen hobbyist, and wasn't happy with his results. So he spent a lot more money on a new camera and got the same results, which was very disappointing. So the key thing here is to just remember that before you start updating your camera body, your lenses, any of that kind of thing, just go back to basics. Ask yourself why you want to change what you've got. Now, when you start out in photography, often you don't know what aspects or what features on a camera are going to be useful to you. But once you get into it a little bit, you'll begin to learn what's there that's useful and what's missing. So if you're at that point, then you'll have a very clear idea of what you need in your new gear and what it has to deliver. But if you don't know that, if you're just getting new gear because you think that will somehow give you better results, then I suggest you don't buy anything and just go back to understanding techniques, understanding lighting, exposure triangle, all of those kind of things, composition, all of that stuff. So if you are, or if you're not happy, I should say, with what you're getting, think about maybe composition. Maybe try testing yourself. So I did a few podcasts ago now, about how limiting yourself can kind of push you into a more creative frame of mind or get you thinking more. So maybe just use one camera lens, one focal length for a week, and shoot using that. There are various things you can do. So if you are looking for ideas, then I recommend that podcast. Shoot at different times of the day to understand the effect of different lighting. Now, if this podcast is aimed primarily at wildlife photography, it applies pretty much equally to travel as well. In fact, most photography, to be honest. So if you do not understand how different lighting can impact your results, try shooting, if you like, the same subject at different times of day under different lighting conditions. So obviously that will depend on the weather a little bit. So if it's cloudy, that might not make too much difference during the day. But definitely if you're in summer with bright sunshine, you will definitely see a difference in your results and the effect of light and color at different times of day. And once you understand that, once you appreciate what the differences are, that will begin to set you up for much more satisfying results when it comes to wildlife, when it comes to travel, when it comes to other types of photography. And that leads me nicely into the second point, which is people just ignore animal behavior patterns. So thinking about times of day, it depends on the animals you're working with. Mammals tend to be more active in the sort of dawn and dusk period. Some are more active at night. Reptiles, pretty much the reverse. They'll tend to be more active during the day when there's heat and there's sunshine because they're cold-blooded, so that's where they get their energy from. So the mistake here that I'm looking at is a lot of photographers don't understand the animal they're trying to photograph. And if you've listened to me talk about wildlife photography, one of the very first things I always ask everyone to do, or to recommend that you do anyway, is to research the animal. And I still do it. And I've been doing this for a while now. But you always learn things. So I'm always reading. I'm looking for things that pop up on my feed about different animal behaviors. I've learned a lot, for example, elephants over the last few years, about the discovery that there are actually bachelor herds of animals, of elephants, male elephants, which hadn't been seen before. And that was discovered in Namibia. There was another article I read recently and did a podcast about it. It might have been a year or two ago now. It feels recent. And that was about how some Indian elephants partially bury their dead, which I thought was extraordinary. So even if you think you know an animal, it does no harm at all just to jump back. I mean, how hard is it to jump on and Google an animal and see what's new, what's been discovered, or just remind yourself about their behavior patterns and when they're most likely to be active. If you're looking at predators, then the way to find them is to go where the prey is. So that's where they'll be. So understanding that kind of thing. The other element of that is being able to predict animal behavior. So if you want a particular shot, it's really helpful if you understand a little bit about how the animal operates. So an example of this might be with humpback whales. If I'm going to get a fluke up shot, so that's one where the animal has lifted its tail right up out of the water, and then it obviously dives down, or in that situation it would dive down with a fluke up shot. I know that when humpback whales are swimming, usually they will take 3 breaths at the surface. So they will break the surface. You'll get a blow where they breathe out. They'll inhale, then they'll go down again, but it will be shallow. So they're sticking close to the surface. They'll do it again, take another breath, then go down again and stay shallow. But on that third breath, so the third time they come up, what they are usually doing, obviously this is not always, but this is generally true for humpback whales, they'll take a breath and then they'll dive down deeper. And what they do is they push their head down much deeper and start to dive down. And that lifts the tail sometimes completely out of the water. So if you imagine if you're swimming and you sort of duck dive down, your feet will come out of the water. And that's what happens with humpbacks. Now, it doesn't always happen because sometimes when they do that deeper dive, they kind of curve down and the fluke will stay just underneath the water. But if you're watching that behavior going on, and certainly if you've seen the animal up on the surface before, you'll get a feel for how they're swimming. So this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. And it means as a photographer, you can predict what's likely to happen. You can get ready to take the shot that you actually want, which would be the fluke out of the water if it's going to happen. So you're ready for it. You're not kind of behind the animal. You're not reacting to what it's doing. You're anticipating what it's doing. Even with birds are a great subject to practice on. Some of them sort of squat a little bit before they take off. So observe, look at videos of birds that you're interested in, watch them if you have access to them, just sit and look at them, just observe how they behave. And all of this is really important from a wildlife photography perspective because we want to be capturing, with birds, it's great to get birds just taking off, that kind of thing. They're more unusual pictures. We see a lot of them sat perched on trees or in flight, but getting that transition from being stationary up to flying is quite a cool thing to get. So this is really important, and it's something that's very easy to forget. It's very easy to become blasé or just settle for ordinary photographs that anybody could take. So that's, I suppose, a challenge to you. The next one is something that I did a whole podcast on some time ago now, actually, but it's about ethics. It's about not disturbing wildlife. And it's something I do talk about regularly, if you've listened to me before, is to recommend that if you do want to go and see wildlife in places like Africa, that kind of thing, rather than going on the regular tourist trips, go and volunteer somewhere where they're working with wildlife or doing conservation in a wildlife area. And the reason is very simply that, first of all, I'm a strong believer in ethics when it comes to working with animals. So you do not do anything to disturb them or stress them. You're there as an observer. You're not a participant. And unfortunately, with a lot of the commercial operations now, they just lose sight of that completely. And in fact, there was one recently in Zambia, going back a few months now, in the middle of 2025, which I think was buffalo. Just trying to remember now, but I got sent a video of it, where people, these safari operators, were just diving in and startling the animals, getting them to run. Some were blocking their routes. It was just a circus. It was chaos, and that to me is not what this is about. And so I'm very against that kind of activity. So when you volunteer, a few things are going to happen. First of all, you're likely to learn an awful lot more about the animal than you would when you go on these tourist trips, because it's pretty standard stuff they just give you. It's nothing particularly useful, but you can get real insights when you do volunteering if you're with a good project. Secondly, you may well be on a private reserve, depending on where you are. And that can mean that you get exclusive access to the animals. So you're getting the same access that someone who's paying maybe $1,000 a night is getting, and you're paying nothing like that to be there as a volunteer. So ethics really important. I've seen people drive vehicles at a lion that was just resting. People do cat calls. There's all sorts of behavior goes on, and really that, in my opinion, is not what it's about. And I'm quite against that. Okay, the next thing is shooting in bad light without a plan. So First of all, you need to understand what good and bad lighting is. And I've already touched on that a little bit with just understanding lighting. So it could be low light, which clearly is a bit of a challenge, and particularly that a lot of mammals, as I've already said, tend to be more active at dawn and dusk or even at night. So you don't have the best lighting. But equally, you might be out in the middle of the day in a savanna somewhere and you've got really harsh lighting, and that is just as bad. It's just as difficult to work with. And the key thing to understand is how it impacts color, how it impacts exposure, how it impacts sharpness. I've already spoken about that in fact, it was the podcast before this one. And first of all, when it comes to getting a good image, you've got to have the detail there in the first place. So it's all very well thinking you might be able to Photoshop something or correct it in post-processing. But if you don't have the detail there in the first place, then that software, it doesn't matter how good it is, it has nothing to work on. So you're now guessing at what might have been there, which is not really what this kind of photography is about, in my opinion. So do you understand, first of all, how to deal with lighting yourself? So practice with it. Just put yourself in scenarios before you leave, while you're at home, or if you're, wherever it's convenient, to just practice shooting in bad light and start to understand your camera system and how to get the most from it. And also, when it comes to photographing wildlife, just try and make sure you're scheduling as far as possible your activities around times of best light. So that would be golden hours, definitely, because you get amazing light if the sun's anywhere visible. You get amazing light there. The animals tend to be a bit more active anyway. Think about using shade and backlighting creatively. Backlighting can give you some amazing images. And also just learn how to expose on your camera. You might have areas that are very bright, some are much darker. Just learn how to do an exposure lock. If you don't know how to do it on your camera, find out, because it's a really useful thing to know. And it means that you can expose for your subject and not kind of point and shoot, hope for the best when you're taking the image. Okay, so number 5 is really being over-reliant on autofocus and to some extent auto mode. So you have to remember that no matter how good the camera, anything that's auto is based on a program, it's based on general photography usually, and it will be trying to make sense of, the camera will be trying to make sense of what it's seeing, if we use those terms, without knowing specifically what you're trying to do. So autofocus is one definitely to get on top of, I should say, in wildlife photography. I always use a single point autofocus. I tend to use the central point because it's much easier. I use back button focus so that once I've set that point and basically locked it, that might be a single shot autofocus, or it might be continuous if the animal is moving. So again, you need to understand the difference between those two. And with back button focus, I can recompose once I've set my focus, so that I then then the subject, which often is the eye of the animal, the eye that's closest to me, I can recompose that so it's not in the center of the image. So you need to understand how to do that. And the reason is simply that, as I was going to say, with wildlife, you often have things going on behind the animal, in front of the animal. It might be grass, it might be leaves, but if you've got any kind of wind movement, they're going to be moving. And it's very easy for things like that, excuse me, to get picked up by the autofocus. And so it's focused on the wrong thing. You might have a beautiful blade of grass, really sharp, beautifully in focus, and an out of focus animal face behind it, which is not generally what we're going for. So understand that. And also with the modes themselves, just understand what they do. So whether you're using aperture priority, shutter speed priority, I use them, and I think most professionals do use modes. And for the very good reason that it takes some of the heavy lifting off. It means that the camera is setting some of the settings for us automatically. So we can focus on creating the image. We can be looking at composition. We can be looking at lighting, all those kind of things. However, you do need to understand what those modes are doing so that you do end up with the photograph you're aiming for and not something that's got the wrong shutter speed or has got a terrible depth of field or wherever it might be. So don't be over-reliant on the automatic modes in the camera. They're definitely helpful, but you need to understand what they're doing and also where they're going to trip you up when it comes to wildlife. Okay, so that was number 5. Number 6 is not preparing for the environment. This is something else I tend to talk about a lot in when I'm talking about prep for wildlife, and it's one of those things that maybe sound a bit sort of boring and not terribly relevant because this is supposed to be about photography, but it's really hard to take good photographs if you're soaking wet, you're freezing cold, you're really uncomfortable because you're wearing the wrong gear and you got caught in a downpour, the temperatures suddenly dropped, and you're not prepared for it at all. So the truth about wildlife photography is that you have to be outside generally. In fact, I think in most cases, none of us would really want to be doing wildlife photography inside because that's not ideal. So if you're outside, you just need to be aware of the conditions. So, for example, when I went to photograph gorillas in southwest Uganda, I mean, they're mountain gorillas and they're called that for a reason. And that area, we were there in rainy season because that's when the gorillas are on the ground more. So that's the time to get photographs of them. It's much harder when they're up in a tree and you're not. But, of course, rainy season means it's likely to rain and the weather can change quite quickly and you're likely to be out for several hours. So we did a hike on the first day I went out, which was 3 hours in each direction on these sort of foothills in the mountains. So we're through vegetation, it's wet, it's slippery, it's muddy, and you need to be prepared for that. So you've got to be wearing the right clothes. So again, do a bit of research on if you can get advice from people who are running whatever you're doing, that's great. Even if you're going into a vehicle, if you're going to be in a vehicle most of the time, it's still good to be wearing the right clothing. And certainly if there's a chance of heavy rain, to be wearing footwear that's waterproof, have a shower jacket or something that will keep the rain out, keep you warm, even if it's just as a sort of windbreaker, because if you're in an open vehicle, once it's moving, it can feel very cold. You get that wind chill factor. So just allow for that. Even if you're expecting it to be quite warm a lot of the time, don't forget that a lot of hot places, let's say, they're hot during the day and in the midday heat, they can actually get quite cold at night. And if you're up early in the morning and it's very cool and then you jump into an open vehicle, it can get much, much cooler. So do think about all of those things. It does no harm to have an extra layer or two with you. You may not use them, but the chances are you will. So just think about that. And also, I guess the other thing I would say is take a bit of medication. I had to do, so I did a shoot in Etosha and I caught a stomach bug of some sort a couple of days before. And without going into the details, I took a lot of pills to keep everything comfortable, let's say, while I was doing my photography. During the night, I got a lot of exercise, which I didn't really want. So, things can happen. So think about your medical kit as well. Just in case you have something go on, then at least you've got a fighting chance. Because especially if you go to a place you've not been before and you may not go back again, you really don't want to lose that opportunity because of, catching something. And unfortunately, these things do happen. Okay, so the final thing I'm just going to talk about is overshooting and under-editing. So again, I like to use burst mode in my camera. Again, it depends on what I'm photographing. If the animal's pretty stationary, then I won't bother. But I might have a slow burst on, and I'll just be careful with my finger pressure so I'm not shooting bursts all the time. But certainly when action's happening, you do want to be in burst mode. So whether it's something like dolphins, porpoising, humpback whale breaching, a predator chasing down prey, anything like that, it's you certainly want to have burst mode. However, don't go crazy with it, because if you suddenly end up with thousands of photographs, on a day's journey, some people get really impressed by the numbers of how many thousands of images they can shoot. But it becomes clutter after a while, because how different can they be? Hopefully, you know your gear well enough that things are in sharp focus. You got the sort of depth of field that you want. Your exposure's correct. So how different can these images be? So I will tend to shoot short bursts, but something I find is a habit of mine is often on the first day or two, I'll shoot a lot of images. But after that, I tend to get a lot more selective, because I've already got basic images of the animals that I'm interested in photographing. And sometimes in those initial photographs, I've got, the money shot, if you like, the one that really stands out. So once I've done my basic shooting in the first day or two, I tend to be more selective. And I think there's also an aspect of that excitement of being out again and photographing animals. And then you sort of go through that after the first couple of days, and you get into a more sensible routine, and I get a lot more objective about it. A good discipline, if you've never worked with film, if you've never worked with film, I should say, learning with film is a really good discipline, because it makes you very conscious about what photographs you're actually taking, because you might have 36 frames in a roll, and then you've got to reload, and you might have a limited number of rolls available, which is how I started out. So yeah, digital, you can shoot lots, but what's the point? So shooting slower bursts. Have a look at what you're shooting. A really good discipline to get into the end of each day, definitely. And maybe if you have a break for lunch, if you can, have a look then as well. And just critique your shots. Look at what you're doing. Have you got the exposure right? Is the shutter speed right for what you're doing? How's your composition? Can you compose things differently? Can you try something different when you take the next set of photographs? So do a kind of in the field critiquing and try to improve what you're getting. And you may well find that over the course of your trip, you might start coming at the end. You might be shooting images that are far, far better than what you started with at the beginning, just because you're looking at what's going on in that environment and you're noticing things you could do differently. Okay, so that is pretty much it. So just to recap, first of all, the 7 things I mentioned were, first of all, chasing gear instead of being on top of your technique. Point number 2 is ignoring animal behavior patterns or not even knowing them. Point 3 was just ethics and disturbing wildlife, so respect where you are and the animals you're with. Point 4 was shooting in bad light without a plan, so understand lighting conditions, how your gear works in different lighting conditions, bearing in mind that depending on the animal if you're shooting wildlife, depending on the animal you're trying to get, they're likely to be doing more interesting things at certain times of day. Number 5, don't be over-reliant on autofocus and auto modes. Understand what they do, but also recognize where the shortcomings are. And often in things like wildlife photography, that's where they'll start to show up, because you're in a more of a niche photography area. The challenges are a little bit different to what you're likely to get in day-to-day in general photography, which is what most people are doing with the cameras, and that's how cameras are programmed. So make sure you understand the limitations of your gear and how to get around them. Number 6 is environments, making sure you've got the right gear, maybe right medication, whatever it might be. And number 7 was just overshooting and perhaps under-editing, maybe having shots that are halfway there, but you don't really understand enough about your editing gear to make the most of them. And again, my general comment on editing is that it is absolutely fundamental, I think, to digital photography. But equally, you don't generally need to edit very much. I tend to tweak contrast and colors mostly. I might reframe things by cropping, but beyond that, I do very little editing. And I honestly think it's a case of less is more in that scenario. Okay, let me just make some quick suggestions for you. So, first one, the best lens to use is the one that you know, and doing what I've suggested will help you get there. When you can, get low. So when you're taking a photograph of an animal, the best thing to do is try and get down low and be at eye level or even lower than eye level. Wait for the eyes to catch light. It doesn't always happen because if you think about it, animals are really being very observant, sometimes because they need to, for their lives depend on it, and which means that they'll tend to keep their eyes out of the sun. However, if you do get some light on an eye, that can really make an amazing photograph. So if you can, look out for that. And then be silent. Try and have your camera in as quiet a mode as it can. Some are really good. Some, it's like a sewing machine. They're terrible things. Or you've got a machine gun in there. But the quieter you are, the better, especially if you're on foot. So I definitely, unless you really know what you're doing, don't track animals on foot or be with a guide who really knows what they're doing. And in fact, that's being quite serious because there are some, this issue happened again in Zambia this year. A couple of ladies, I think New Zealand lady and English lady, or they were living, I think they might have been sisters actually. Unfortunately, they were killed by elephants because the guide, who was from, I think it was a resort, but he basically didn't know what he was doing and got them into a very dangerous situation, and unfortunately it cost them their lives. So without being frivolous about these things, it's really good to check out the guide. Be very, very careful when you're on foot. Be aware of wind direction, that kind of thing. So you obviously want to be downwind of animals when you're on foot. So yeah, all of that stuff. So do a bit of research. Okay, so I guess just to sign off on this one, I hope you found this interesting, but just remember, wildlife photography, it's not about perfection. It's much more about patience. It's about preparation. It's about respecting the animals you're with. And if you can apply the things I've suggested here in these 7, or highlighting these 7 mistakes, hopefully that will allow you to come back from your next trip with photographs that you really love. Okay, so thank you for listening. Please remember to like and subscribe if you feel I've earned it. Thank you for your support this year. Please take a look at the website, buy me a coffee, or even subscribe to do a paid subscription or donate. All of that is really helpful. It allows me to carry on doing what I'm doing. And if you find these give you value, that would certainly be appreciated. Okay, so Happy New Year, and I'll speak to you in the next podcast. Bye for now. Oh, and just one more thing before you go. Just remember to drop any comments that you have or questions, and I'll get back to them in a future podcast. And remember that there's a new podcast every Friday. So if you've enjoyed this one, please remember to like and subscribe and join me on my mailing list, and you'll get a heads up about the latest podcast. So bye for now.